The human fleet arrived at the edge of the Crithian home system with overwhelming force. Admiral Minho commanded from the battleship Indomitable, surrounded by 50 warships that Earth had sent as reinforcements. Every vessel was ready for battle. On the planet below, the Crithian capital city gleamed in the sunlight. Billions of Crithians lived here, unaware that their leaders had started a war they could not win. The Crithian military was mobilized, but most of their fleet was still traveling toward Valorian space. They had left their homeworld poorly defended. Minho opened a communication channel that would broadcast to the entire planet. People of Crithia, this is Admiral Minho of the human fleet. Your leaders committed genocide against the Valorian people. They killed millions of innocent beings. We are here to ensure this never happens again. On the planet's surface, Emperor Zolgrath watched the human ships in orbit. He was surrounded by his military advisors, all of them arguing about what to do. We should negotiate, one advisor said. The humans have proven they can fight. We can offer them resources, territory, anything they want. No. Zolgrath slammed his fist on the table. We are the Crithian Empire. We do not bow to anyone, especially not to primitives from an unknown world. We will fight them and we will win. Minho's message continued. Surrender now and face justice for your crimes. Refuse and we will be forced to take action. You have 1 hour to decide. Zolgrath's response was immediate. You dare threaten us in our own system? You are nothing but savages. We will crush you. He ordered all defensive stations to open fire on the human fleet. The battle began. Crithian orbital platforms and defense satellites launched missiles and energy weapons at the human ships. The humans had expected this. Their shields absorbed the damage while they systematically destroyed each defensive position. Jae-hyun led fighter squadrons toward the planet, dodging defensive fire. His mission was to disable the planet's military communication network. Without coordination, the Crithian defense forces would be much less effective. He flew through the atmosphere, pulling maneuvers that made his vision blur. Anti-aircraft fire filled the sky around him. One of his wingmen took a hit and went down. Jae-hyun felt the loss but kept flying. This was war. People died in war. He reached the main communication tower and fired missiles. The structure collapsed in a shower of debris. All across the planet, similar attacks were happening. Human forces were not killing civilians, but they were destroying military infrastructure with brutal efficiency. On the ground, Commander Seo-jun prepared his Marines for possible planetary assault. They were loaded into drop pods, ready to launch if the Crithians refused to surrender. Seo-jun hoped it would not come to that. Fighting in cities meant civilian casualties, but if the Crithians forced their hand, the Marines were ready. In the capital city, panic was spreading. The citizens watched their mighty defenses being dismantled. They watched human ships orbit with impunity. They realized that their leaders had made a terrible mistake. Meanwhile, far away in Valorian space, Bora detected something alarming. The Crithian main fleet, frustrated that the humans were not where they expected, had changed course. They were heading back toward Valoria, and they were planning something desperate. Captain Haywan, you need to see this, Bora said urgently over the communication link. The Crithian fleet has launched a spread of planet-killer missiles. They are heading straight for the Valorian colonies. Haywan felt her heart stop. The human fleet was at the Crithian homeworld. They had left only a small defensive force with the Valorians. There was no way that force could intercept all those missiles. Time to impact? 20 minutes. 20 minutes to save millions of lives. 20 minutes to make an impossible choice. Haywan looked at Jiwoo, her chief engineer. Can we make an emergency jump from here to Valoria? Jiwoo's face went pale. Captain, an emergency jump through normal space? The stress on the engines would be enormous. We might not survive it. Can we do it? Maybe, but it is dangerous. Do it. Signal the other ships in the defense fleet. Tell them to prepare for emergency jump. Back at the Crithian homeworld, Minho received word of what was happening. The Crithians had launched a final desperate attack on the Valorians, counting on the humans being too far away to stop it. On the planet below, Zolgrath smiled cruelly. Even if we lose here, we will still exterminate the Valorians. The humans cannot save them. But he did not understand human determination. The Perseverance and 5 other human ships initiated emergency jump procedures. This was not a normal faster-than-light jump. This was tearing a hole in space and forcing the ships through, using raw power instead of carefully calculated trajectories. The ships shuddered violently. Hull plates screamed under the stress. Power systems overloaded. But the ships jumped, disappearing from Crithian space and reappearing near Valoria in seconds instead of hours. HFY barely had time to recover from the jump before giving orders. All ships intercept formation. Target those missiles. Fire everything we have. The human ships positioned themselves between the incoming missiles and the Valorian colonies. They fired their weapons, destroying missile after missile. But there were too many. Some would get through. Brace for impact, HFY ordered. The missiles struck the human ships instead of the colonies. Explosions tore through hulls. Fires burned in corridors. People died at their stations, killed by flying shrapnel or explosive decompression. The Perseverance took 3 direct hits. The entire port side of the ship was destroyed. Life support failed on 4 decks. But the ship stayed between the missiles and the colonies, absorbing the punishment meant for the Valorians. When the attack was over, 3 human ships were severely damaged. Hundreds of crew members were dead or dying. But every single Valorian colony survived. Not one missile reached its target. On Valoria, Lyra watched from the ground as the human ships burned in orbit. She watched them sacrifice themselves to save her people. Tears streamed down her face. These humans, these terrifying Deathworlders, had given everything to protect strangers. Across the galaxy, billions of beings watched on the galactic network. They watched the humans take the missiles meant for the Valorians. They watched the ships burn but never retreat. They watched and finally understood. The humans were not conquerors. They were protectors. At the Concordat station, Televen was watching with the other representatives. When the last missile was destroyed and the Valorian colonies were confirmed safe, the chamber fell silent. Then slowly, representatives from hundreds of species began standing. It was a gesture of respect, of acknowledgement. Insu stood among them, his face wet with tears for the humans who had died. But he also felt pride. His species had done something incredible. They had proven that strength and compassion could coexist. Back at the Crithian homeworld, the military officers who had been watching the battle at Valoria finally acted. They arrested Emperor Zulgrath. War Commander Cormac, who had survived the first battle, led the coup. Enough, Cormac said as soldiers took Zulgrath into custody. We have lost. The Emperor's pride has destroyed our fleet and endangered our people. It is time to surrender. He contacted Admiral Minho. Human Commander, this is War Commander Cormac. Emperor Zulgrath has been removed from power. The Crithian military wishes to negotiate surrender terms. Minho was cautious. How do we know this is not a trick? You do not. But consider this. You could destroy our homeworld right now. You have the weapons. You have the position. But you have not fired on civilian targets. You have not killed innocents. This tells me you are better than we are. The negotiations took days. In the end, the terms were clear. The Crithian Empire would be restructured. War criminals would face trial. The genocide against the Valorians would be recognized and reparations would be paid. Crithian military would be limited and monitored by the Concordat. But the humans did not occupy Crithian worlds. They did not enslave the population. They did not take revenge beyond what was just. Dongmin oversaw the initial peacekeeping operations. He worked with moderate Crithian leaders to rebuild their government. It was hard work. Many Crithians resented the humans. But Dongmin had studied Earth's history. He knew how to rebuild after war. We are not here to punish you, he told a gathering of Crithian citizens. We are here to ensure this never happens again. Your leaders made terrible choices, but you are not your leaders. You can choose to be better. Months later, Insu stood at the Concordat and presented humanity's formal position to the galaxy. It was called the Deathworld Doctrine. Humanity pledges to defend species who cannot defend themselves from extinction-level threats. We will not conquer. We will not enslave. We will not impose our government on others. But we will respond to genocide. We will protect the innocent. This is our promise to the galaxy. Not every species was happy with this. Some feared human power. Some questioned human motives. But many were grateful. The Valorians were not the only species that faced threats. Now they had someone to call for help. Taeyang and Ventaris worked together to establish the Institute of Shared Survival. It was dedicated to helping peaceful species develop defensive capabilities and preventing future genocides. They taught conflict resolution but also self-defense. 3 weeks after the battle, Insu arrived at the Galactic Concordat headquarters aboard a diplomatic shuttle. He was nervous. Earth had sent him as their first official representative to the galactic community, and he had no idea what to expect. The Concordat station was enormous, a ring-shaped structure orbiting a neutron star. Thousands of species had representatives here. It was supposed to be a place of peace, where differences were resolved through discussion and compromise. Insu walked through the main hall and felt dozens of eyes watching him. Some looked curious, some looked afraid. He understood why. The battle at Valoria had been broadcast across the galaxy. Everyone had seen what humans could do. Telavan, the Concordat speaker, was waiting for him in the main chamber. She was a graceful being with flowing tentacles and large, kind eyes. She greeted Insu with formal politeness, but he could sense the tension in her movements. Representative Insu, welcome to the Concordat. We have many questions about your species. I will answer what I can, Insu replied carefully. The chamber filled with representatives from hundreds of species. They all wanted to know the same things. Where did humans come from? Why were they so powerful? What did they want? Insu explained Earth. He described the high gravity, the extreme weather, the dangerous predators. He talked about human history, carefully avoiding the worst parts. He emphasized that humans wanted peace, that they had only fought to protect the Valorians. But you destroyed a Crithian fleet, one representative said. You killed thousands. How can you claim to want peace? The Crithians were committing genocide, Insu replied. They were killing millions of innocent people. We had to stop them. By using overwhelming violence? By terrifying the entire galaxy? Insu felt his patience wearing thin. What would you have had us do? Talk to them while they murdered children? The Valorians tried negotiation. It did not work. Sometimes, violence is the only language that bullies understand. The chamber erupted in debate. Some species agreed with the humans. Others were horrified by their methods. The discussion went on for hours, going in circles. Meanwhile, on a damaged military station at the edge of Valorian space, Bora was analyzing intelligence data. She was one of Earth's best intelligence analysts, sent to help monitor the Crithian response to their defeat. What she found made her blood run cold. The Crithians were not accepting defeat. They were mobilizing their main battle fleet. Hundreds of warships, including some of the largest vessels in known space. They were not coming to negotiate. They were coming to destroy the humans and finish what they started with the Valorians. Bora immediately sent her findings to Captain Haiwan and the Earth Command. This was no longer a small conflict. This was going to be a full-scale war. On Valoria's surviving colonies, Hyunwoo was working himself to exhaustion. He was a humanitarian coordinator, responsible for organizing relief efforts. The problem was that helping the Valorians was incredibly difficult. Human food was toxic to them. Human medicine had to be carefully modified or it would kill them. Even human touch could accidentally injure them. Everything had to be done carefully, slowly, with constant attention to avoid causing harm. We are trying, Hyunwoo explained to Ventaris, who had survived the capital's destruction. But our biology is so different. What heals us might poison you. What seems gentle to us might break your bones. Ventaris understood. You saved us. That is enough. We do not expect you to be perfect. But Hyunwoo wanted to do more. He watched Valorian children who had lost their families, who were traumatized by the violence they had witnessed. He wanted to comfort them, but even a gentle hug from a human could crack their fragile ribs. Back at the Concordat, Insu was in a private meeting with Telavan. She had asked to speak with him alone, away from the other representatives. I need to be honest with you, she said quietly. The Concordat has no military. We have always relied on economic sanctions and diplomatic pressure to resolve conflicts. When those fail, she trailed off, looking uncomfortable. When those fail, species like the Valorians get exterminated. Insu finished for her. Telavan's tentacles drooped in shame. Yes, we knew what was happening. We tried to negotiate with the Crithians. They ignored us. We had no way to stop them. So you just watched while they died? What else could we do? We are not warriors. Most species in the galaxy are not. We evolved on gentle worlds. We do not understand violence the way you do. Insu felt a mix of anger and pity. The galactic community had built a civilization based on peace and cooperation. It was admirable, but it also left them helpless when faced with species who chose violence. "The Crithians are coming with their full fleet," Insu said. "My intelligence officers have confirmed it. They want revenge for their defeat, and they want to finish exterminating the Valorians." Televin's eyes widened in fear. "How many ships?" "Hundreds. Maybe more than 1,000. You cannot fight them all. Even with your advanced weapons and tactics, the numbers are too great." "Maybe, but we are going to try anyway." Televen was silent for a long moment. Then she said something that surprised Insu. "Why? Why would you risk your entire species for people you barely know?" Insu thought about the question. He thought about Lyra and the other Valorian children. He thought about the recordings of destroyed cities and murdered families. He thought about the human soldiers who had already died defending strangers. Because if we do not, who will? If we run now, the Crithians will finish what they started. Then they will move on to the next weak species and the next and the next. Someone has to say no. Someone has to stand up and fight. On the Perseverance, Haywan was holding a strategy meeting with her officers and representatives from Earth Command. They were discussing how to defend against a fleet 10 times larger than the one they had just defeated. "We cannot win a straight fight," Kyung-soo said bluntly. "Even with our advantages, we will be overwhelmed by sheer numbers." "Then we do not fight straight," Haywan replied. "The Crithians expect us to defend the Valorian colonies. We let them think that is our plan. But instead," she pulled up a star chart showing the Crithian home system, "we strike at their heart. We take the fight to their homeworld." The room fell silent. What Haywan was suggesting was incredibly risky. It meant leaving the Valorians temporarily undefended. It meant traveling deep into enemy territory. It meant betting everything on one bold attack. "If we fail, the Valorians die," Dongmin pointed out. "If we stay here and fight defensively, we all die," Haywan countered. "The Crithians think they know how wars are fought in this galaxy. Slow, careful, with lots of negotiation. They expect us to follow those rules. We show them that we do not play by their rules." While the humans debated strategy, Tai Yang was working with Ventaris on a fascinating discovery. The ancient quantum communications array that had sent the distress signal contained more than just communication technology. It had a complete database of information left behind by whoever built it. "Look at this," Ventaris said, pointing to translated text on a screen. "The builders were not from our galaxy. They came from somewhere else, running from something terrible." Taeyang read the text and felt a chill. They were Deathworlders, like us. They were powerful, but they made mistakes. They used their strength to conquer instead of protect. They made enemies. Many enemies. Then what happened to them? They fought a war that lasted thousands of years. They won, but the cost was so high that their civilization collapsed. This database is a warning, a message to any other Deathworlder species that might find it. The message was simple but profound. Strength without wisdom leads to destruction. Power without compassion leads to isolation. The ability to fight does not mean fighting is always the answer. Tai Yang thought about the human fleet preparing to attack the Crithian homeworld. He thought about the decision facing humanity. They could crush the Crithians, prove their dominance, terrify the galaxy into submission. Or they could find another way. He sent a message to Insu at the Concordat. They needed to talk about what came after the fighting stopped. Because fighting was the easy part. Building something better afterward, that was the real challenge. On Earth, in the halls of the Unified Space Command, leaders were making hard decisions. They were committing more ships, more soldiers, more resources to the conflict. They were preparing for a war that might define humanity's place in the galaxy for generations. But they were also afraid of becoming the thing they hated, afraid of being remembered as conquerors instead of protectors, afraid that saving the Valorians would be the first step toward becoming something terrible. The Deathworlders had answered the plea for help. Now they had to decide what kind of saviors they wanted to be. The Crithian fleet arrived at the outer Valorian colonies with overwhelming force. 50 warships, including 6 heavy cruisers and 2 massive dreadnoughts. Cormac was taking no chances. He would crush these humans quickly and return to his original mission. On the Perseverance, alarms blared as the Crithian fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel. Haywan looked at the tactical display and felt her stomach tighten. The human fleet had 6 ships total. They were outnumbered almost 10 to 1. "Captain, receiving a transmission from the Crithian flagship," the communications officer reported. "Put it through." Cormac's face appeared on the screen. He was a tall creature with gray-scaled skin and 4 arms. His eyes were cold and calculating. Human vessel, you have interfered in Crithian business. Surrender immediately and we will spare your lives. Resist and we will destroy you. HFY stared back at him without blinking. Crithian commander, you are committing genocide against a peaceful species. Leave this system immediately or we will force you to leave. Cormac laughed. It was a harsh barking sound. You have 6 ships. I have 50. You cannot possibly win. This is your last chance to surrender. We will not surrender. We will not run, and we will not let you continue killing innocent people. HFY cut the transmission. She looked at her crew. All ships, battle stations. Prepare for combat. The human fleet formed a defensive line between the Crithian vessels and the Valorian colonies. It looked like suicide. The Crithians began their attack, confident in their victory. Plasma bolts and energy beams filled the space between the fleets. The human ship's shields absorbed what they could, but some weapons got through. Hull plating cracked. Armor burned. Damage reports flooded in from all vessels, but the human ships did not break. They were built by a species that understood redundancy, multiple power systems, backup life support, reinforced structures. Each ship was designed to keep fighting even when heavily damaged, and now the humans returned fire. Jae-hyun sat in the cockpit of his fighter, one of 50 small craft launched from the military vessels. He was a pilot and a damn good one. On Earth, he had trained in high-performance aircraft that could pull turns that would make most people pass out. Now he pushed his fighter through maneuvers that would be impossible for most galactic species to survive. The G-forces pressed him into his seat. His vision narrowed. His specially designed suit squeezed his body to keep blood flowing to his brain. This was normal for a human pilot. This was what they trained for. The Crithian fighters tried to match his movements but could not handle the acceleration. Their pilots were not built for this kind of stress. Jae-hyun could turn faster, accelerate harder, and maintain consciousness in situations that would kill them. He locked onto a Crithian fighter and fired. The enemy craft exploded. He immediately moved to the next target, his movement smooth and efficient. Around him, other human pilots were doing the same. The Crithian fighter squadrons were being torn apart. On the larger scale, the battle was not going as Cormac had expected. His ships outnumbered the humans, yes, but human weapons were terrifyingly effective. Their railguns fired metal slugs that punched through Crithian shields like they were not even there. Their missiles tracked targets with impossible accuracy. Their energy weapons cut through armor that was supposed to be impervious, and the human ships themselves refused to die. Cormac watched as one human vessel took fire from 3 of his cruisers simultaneously. The ship's hull glowed red-hot. Explosions rippled across its surface, but it kept fighting, its weapons never stopping. Dongmin led the Marines in a desperate gambit. Their transport ship accelerated toward a Crithian dreadnought, taking heavy fire the entire way. The ship's armor held just long enough. They crashed into the dreadnought's docking bay and the Marines poured out. The Crithians had never experienced boarding actions. They had never needed to. Most species in the galaxy preferred to fight at a distance using technology and negotiation. The concept of soldiers physically invading an enemy ship seemed barbaric. But humans had been fighting each other hand to hand for thousands of years. The Marines moved through the Crithian ship like a trained unit, covering each other, clearing rooms with brutal efficiency. The Crithian crew tried to fight back, but they were not prepared. They had no training for close combat. They had no weapons designed for fighting inside a ship. The Marines had both. One Shik kicked in a door and fired his weapon in one smooth motion. The Crithian on the other side went down. He moved forward, checking corners, watching for threats. Behind him, his squad followed with perfect coordination. They fought their way to the dreadnought's engineering section. One Shik planted explosive charges on the main power core. 30 seconds, he said into his radio. Everyone out. The Marines ran back to their transport ship, fighting past Crithian security forces who were finally starting to organize a response. But it was too late. The charges detonated. The dreadnought's power core went critical. The massive ship broke apart from the inside, torn to pieces by its own power systems. The explosion lit up the battlefield like a second sun. Cormac watched his flagship die and felt his confidence die with it. The humans were not just winning, they were dominating. His fleet, which should have crushed them easily, was being systematically destroyed. On the Perseverance, young Mi was broadcasting everything. The communications officer had set up a connection to the galactic network, letting other species watch the battle in real time. HFY had approved it. Let the galaxy see what happens to those who commit genocide. Let them see what humans do to protect the innocent. Across dozens of worlds, millions of beings watched the battle. They saw the small human fleet stand against overwhelming odds. They saw the Crithian ships being destroyed one by one. They saw a species they had never heard of fight with skill and ferocity that shocked everyone. The Valorians watched too. Lyra stood in the Perseverance's observation deck, staring at the battle through the reinforced windows. She saw the human ships burning but never retreating. She saw the fighters dancing through enemy fire. She saw the Crithian fleet that had destroyed her world being torn apart. "Why?" she asked Tae-Yang, who stood nearby. "Why would you risk so much for us? You don't even know us." Tae-Yang was quiet for a moment. "Because it is the right thing to do. Because we know what it is like to face extinction. Because—" He paused. "Because someone has to stand up to bullies and we know how to fight." The battle lasted 4 hours. When it was over, 30 Crithian ships were destroyed. 20 more were damaged and retreating. The human fleet had suffered heavy damage. 2 of their military vessels were barely functional. The Perseverance had taken multiple hits that killed dozens of crew members, but they had won. Against impossible odds, they had won. Cormac sat in his damaged command chair, staring at the tactical display in disbelief. His fleet was broken. His mission was a failure. And worst of all, he now understood the truth. The humans were not just another species. They were apex predators from a world that had shaped them into perfect warriors. They were faster, stronger, tougher, and more skilled at fighting than any species he had ever encountered. They were Deathworlders, and they had just announced their presence to the galaxy in the most terrifying way possible. Cormac gave the order to retreat. His remaining ships fled the system, leaving behind their dead and wounded. The humans did not pursue. They had achieved their objective. The Valorian colonies were safe. On the Perseverance, HFY slumped in her command chair, exhausted. Her crew was cheering, celebrating their victory. But she felt no joy. She thought of the people who had died today, human and Crithian both. She thought of what this battle meant, what it would lead to. Humanity had just shown the galaxy what they were capable of. They had saved the Valorians, but they had also terrified every other species watching. The Deathworlders were here, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Valorian system. Captain HFY stood on the bridge of the Perseverance, staring at the sensor readings with growing horror. The system was full of debris. Shattered ships, destroyed stations, and the wreckage of an entire civilization floated in the darkness. "How many survivors?" she asked. Her tactical officer, Kyung-Soo, checked the scanners. "We are detecting life signs on the outer planets. Maybe a few million. But the inner worlds," and he shook his head. "The inner worlds are gone." Tae-Yang stood nearby, his face pale. He had spent weeks studying the Valorian culture from their broadcasts and records. They were artists, philosophers, scientists. They had never developed weapons because they had never needed them. Their world had been peaceful, with few predators and abundant resources. They had never learned to fight because fighting had never been necessary, and now they were almost extinct. "Captain, we are receiving a distress signal," the communications officer reported. "Multiple ships under attack. 20,000 kilometers from our position." HFY did not hesitate. "All ships, battle formation. Maximum speed. Prepare weapons." The human fleet moved like a pack of predators, fast and coordinated. Within minutes, they arrived at the location of the distress signal. What they saw made HFY's blood boil. 3 large warships were attacking a convoy of small civilian vessels. The civilian ships were trying to flee, but they were slow and fragile. The warships were picking them off one by one, their weapons tearing through the thin hulls like paper. "Those are Crithian vessels," Kyung-Soo confirmed. "Destroyer class. They have not detected us yet." "Target the lead ship," HFY ordered. "All weapons. Fire when ready." The Perseverance was not a warship, but it carried weapons designed by a species that had fought thousands of wars against itself. The railguns fired metal slugs accelerated to incredible speeds. The energy weapons could cut through armor designed to withstand asteroid impacts. The Crithian destroyer's shields flickered and died. The hull cracked open. Atmosphere vented into space. Within seconds, the ship was dead. The other two Crithian vessels immediately turned to face this new threat. They fired their weapons at the human ships. Plasma bolts and energy beams struck the Perseverance's hull. HFY watched the damage reports. Minor hull breaching on Deck 3, some armor damage, but the ship was still fully operational. Human vessels were built to survive Earth's gravity, to withstand corrosive oceans and crushing atmospheric pressure. Alien weapons designed to disable civilian transports barely scratched them. Return fire. Destroy those ships. The battle was over in less than 5 minutes. The human fleet did not just disable the Crithian vessels, they completely destroyed them. No survivors. No mercy. In the refugee ships, the Valorians watched in shock and terror. They had never seen such violence, such overwhelming force. They did not know whether to be grateful or afraid. HFY opened a communication channel to the refugee convoy. "This is Captain HFY of the human vessel Perseverance. We received your distress call. We are here to help." There was a long silence. Then a weak voice responded in broken galactic common. You destroyed them. So fast. Who are you?" "We are humans. From a planet called Earth. We are here to protect you." The refugees were brought aboard the human ships. Medical officer Subin set up emergency treatment centers to care for the wounded. What she saw disturbed her greatly. The Valorians were incredibly fragile. Their bones broke easily. Their skin tore at the slightest pressure. Their immune systems were weak, unable to fight off infections that would be minor to humans. "How did they survive this long?" Subin asked as she carefully bandaged a Valorian child. "They never had to," Taeyang explained. He was helping with translation, using the growing database of Valorian language. Their world was gentle. No dangerous predators. No harsh weather. No diseases. They evolved without threats, so their bodies never developed strong defenses. Subin looked at the child. "And now they face enemies who want to kill them all." The young Valorian named Lyra was among the refugees. She had survived the destruction of the capital and managed to escape on one of the last transport ships. Now she stood in the Perseverance's medical bay, staring at the humans with wide eyes. She had never seen creatures like them. They were so tall, so heavy, so strong. She watched Subin lift a medical container that would require 3 Valorians working together. The human woman did it with one hand, barely noticing the weight. "Are you soldiers?" Lyra asked in halting galactic common. Subin smiled gently. "No, I'm a doctor. I heal people. But you are so strong. And your ships are so powerful. You destroyed the Crithian vessels like they were nothing." Taeyang knelt down to Lyra's level, being careful not to move too quickly. Even his normal movement seemed aggressive to the Valorians. "Where we come from, everyone has to be strong. Our world is dangerous. High gravity, extreme weather, many predators. We had to become tough to survive." "A death world," Lyra whispered. She had learned about such planets in her studies. Worlds where evolution created super predators. She had thought they were rare, maybe even myths. Now she was standing in a ship full of death world creatures, and they were the only thing between her people and extinction. On the bridge, Kyung-Soo was analyzing data gathered from the Crithian ships before they were destroyed. What he found was disturbing. "Captain, I have been reviewing the Crithian communications. They are part of an empire. A large one. They have been expanding for centuries, conquering weaker species. Are they all like this? Killing civilians?" Hee-Won asked. "No. Usually they just take resources and establish dominance. But the Valorians..." Kyung-Soo pulled up a report. "The Crithians see them as competitors for resources. They decided it was easier to eliminate them completely than to negotiate." Hee-Won felt rage building inside her. On Earth, humanity had fought terrible wars. They had committed atrocities. But they had learned, slowly and painfully, that some things were unacceptable. Genocide was one of them. What else do we know about the Crithians? They are stronger than the Valorians but still evolved on a gentle world. They rely heavily on technology and numbers. Their strategy is overwhelming force against weaker opponents. They have never faced serious resistance. Until now," Hee-Won said quietly. Across the system, Crithian War Commander Cormac received reports of the destroyed patrol ships. At first he was merely annoyed. Some other species had wandered into his operation. It happened sometimes. He would send a larger force to deal with them. Then he saw the combat recordings recovered from the patrol ships before they were destroyed. He watched the human vessels tank damage that should have disabled them. He watched their weapons completely obliterate Crithian shields and armor. He watched the battle end in less time than it took to issue retreat orders. For the first time in his career, Cormac felt something unfamiliar. It took him a moment to recognize the emotion. It was fear. He immediately sent a message to the main Crithian fleet. They needed reinforcements. These humans, whoever they were not a minor annoyance. They were a real threat. On the Perseverance, Haywan gathered her officers. We have a decision to make. We came here to help the Valorians, but helping them means fighting the Crithians. Are we prepared to start a war? There was silence in the room. Then Dongmin spoke up. He was the Marine Corps commander, responsible for the soldiers on the military vessels. With respect, Captain, the war already started. The Crithians started it when they began committing genocide. We are just choosing which side to fight on. Around the table, heads nodded in agreement. These were not politicians or diplomats. These were soldiers and spacers who had seen the refugee children, who had heard the stories of destroyed cities, who understood exactly what was at stake. Then we fight, Haywan said. We make our stand here. The crystalline towers of Valoria Prime shattered like glass under the orbital bombardment. Ventaris watched through the observation dome as another section of the capital city collapsed into glittering dust. His people were dying by the thousands, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. The Crithians had come without warning 3 months ago. Their massive warships appeared in the sky and immediately began their attack. The Valorians tried to negotiate, tried to understand what they had done wrong, but the Crithians never responded. They just kept firing. Ventaris was a high scholar, one of the keepers of ancient knowledge. He had spent his life studying the ruins left behind by civilizations that came before. Now he stood in the deepest vault beneath the Academy of Eternal Memory, staring at a device that might be his people's last hope. The quantum communications array was impossibly old. His team had discovered it buried beneath layers of rock, preserved perfectly by technologies they still did not understand. The markings on its surface belonged to no known language, but after years of study, Ventaris had learned how to activate it. Another explosion rocked the building above. Dust fell from the ceiling of the vault. Ventaris made his decision. He placed his 3-fingered hands on the control panel and began the activation sequence. The device hummed to life, filling the vault with soft blue light. Ventaris spoke into it, not knowing if anyone would hear, not knowing if anyone would care. He described his people, their world, their desperate situation. He begged for help from anyone listening in the vast darkness between stars. Then he sent the message into the void and waited. Across the galaxy, on a small monitoring station orbiting a yellow sun, Tai Yang sat at his console drinking cold coffee. He was a xenoanthropologist, which meant he studied alien cultures. Mostly this involved sitting alone in space, listening to radio signals from distant stars and trying to understand what they meant. He had been doing this job for 3 years. It was boring work, but someone had to do it. Humanity had only recently developed faster-than-light travel. They were still learning that they were not alone in the universe. The console beeped. Taeyang looked at the screen and frowned. The signal was unlike anything in his database. It was using quantum entanglement, a technology humanity had only just begun to understand. The signal was impossibly clear, as if the source was right next to him instead of thousands of light years away. He put on his headphones and listened. The message was being broadcast in multiple languages, none of which he recognized at first, but the computer was already working on translation, comparing patterns and structures to known linguistic forms. After 20 minutes, the first translation appeared on his screen. Taeyang read it once, then again, his hands beginning to shake. The message was a cry for help. An entire species was being exterminated. Their cities were burning. Their people were dying. They were begging anyone who could hear to please help them. Taeyang immediately contacted his supervisor. Then his supervisor contacted Earth Command. Within hours, the message had reached the highest levels of human government. On Valoria Prime, the situation grew worse. Cormac, the Crithian war commander, stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the planet below. The Valorians were weak creatures, barely able to lift their own body weight in their low gravity. They had never developed weapons, never learned to fight. They were perfect targets. The Crithian Empire believed in strength. They believed the galaxy belonged to those who could take it. The Valorians had valuable resources on their worlds, resources the Crithians wanted. So the Crythians simply decided to remove the Valorians and take what they needed. It was not personal. It was just business. Cormac gave the order for the next wave of attacks. His ships moved into position over the last remaining Valorian cities. Soon it would be over. In orbit around Earth, Captain HFY stood in the briefing room of the spaceship Perseverance. She was looking at a holographic display showing the Valorian system. Next to her stood her chief engineer Jiwoo and dozens of other officers. "This is a mistake," one of the admirals was saying through the video link. "We should not get involved in alien wars. We barely understand what is happening out there." "They are being exterminated," HFY replied, her voice calm but firm. "The message is clear. This is not a war. This is genocide. Guys, what can we do? We don't know anything about these Crythians. They might be more advanced than us. We could be leading our people into a massacre." HFY looked at the data on the screen. The Perseverance was the exploration vessel, but like all human ships, it was built tough. Earth was a harsh world compared to most planets. Everything humans built had to withstand high gravity, extreme temperatures, and corrosive atmosphere. Their ships were designed to survive. "We have to try," she said simply. The debate continued for hours. Politicians argued about the risks. Military leaders discussed strategy. Scientists presented data about the unknown regions of space they would have to cross. Finally, the decision came down from the Unified Space Command. A small fleet would be sent to investigate. If the situation was as described, they would offer assistance. But they would not start a war unless absolutely necessary. Captain HFY received her orders. The Perseverance would lead the mission, along with 3 military vessels and 2 medical ships. They would carry the best soldiers, the best equipment, and the best doctors humanity could provide. As the fleet prepared to depart, Taeyang was transferred from his monitoring station to the Perseverance. They needed someone who understood the Valorian message, someone who could help with first contact. He packed his belongings and tried not to think about how scared he was. On Valoria Prime, Venteris huddled in the ruins of the Academy with a handful of survivors. The Crythian bombardment had stopped for the moment, but everyone knew it would resume soon. The quantum array was destroyed. The vault had collapsed. Venteris held the hand of a young Valorian named Lyra, barely more than a child. She was crying softly, asking if anyone had heard their message, asking if help was coming. Venteris wanted to lie, wanted to give her hope. But he was a scholar. He dealt in truth. "I don't know," he said quietly. "I sent the message. But I don't know if anyone heard it. I don't know if anyone cares." Above them, the Crythian ships moved into position once more. The bombardment would resume at dawn. By tomorrow, the capital would be completely destroyed. But far away, moving faster than light itself, the human fleet was coming. The message had been heard. The Plea had reached across the stars, and the Deathworlders were coming to answer.